and welcome to the Bailiwick Podcast. I'm Tom Innes. In this episode, our focus will be on the planning department. It's an area where many islanders will have had dealings with government over the years, and it's fair to say that in plenty of cases this will have sparked frustration about delays and some of the so-called red tape that's involved. But public feedback has registered with the department and with Environment Minister Steve Luce, and change has been underway. A comprehensive reform agenda promises to streamline the development process while balancing the need to preserve the island's unique heritage. But how does this work in practice, and what evidence is there of improvements making a real positive difference to those who've reported problems in the past? That's what I'm set to discuss today with our guest, Head of Development Andrew Marx, as we drill down into the details of how Jersey is planning for the future. Great. I'd like to welcome to the studio Andrew Marx, who is the Head of Development at Land with the Department of Infrastructure and the Environment. He's just coming into his second full year in the role, having joined in September 2023, and we're looking forward to discussing some of the changes, some of the key priorities that the government has for the planning service. So, good afternoon, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Just like to start is we've learnt in the past 12 months that the government has made reform of the planning service one of its priorities, and how has that translated into what you've been asked to do by ministers in terms of actually achieving that priority?
Yes, so the service improvements that we've been trying to bring in for a while now really landed properly in early 2023 with the McKinnon report that was delivered to the then minister, who agreed to a series of improvements in government. So we've been busy implementing those, and there was a long list of things that we were committed to doing. And then when Minister Luce came to join us in sort of the early part of 2024, it was decided that those activities would continue, but the minister then also subsequently published an additional report that made really three big commitments to what he wanted us to deliver in this political cycle, which is around looking at how planning appeals work, also looking at permitted development and making it easier for people to build structures and do things without planning permission, and then the last thing, actually looking at how the island plan is made and how it works and how it impacts on planning applications. So those are the three big things that we are focusing on with our colleagues in the Cabinet Office. But then in the meantime, we've also done a lot of work in the background to try and make people's lives easier when they engage with the planning system by making the planning application process smoother, by giving them quicker decisions, and also reducing the backlog in the number of applications that we have, and trying to give more planning permissions.
Great. And as an overall answer, we'll get into some of the details of this, I'm sure. But what in overall terms, what progress have you made so far? Where do you feel you've managed to instigate the significant changes? I
think one of the main issues really is around industry engagement, which I'm personally very excited about, because it's given me the opportunity in the year and a bit that I've been here to go around and see all the architects and developers and people who we deal with sometimes on a daily basis. So, and that's an improvement that's not always immediately apparent because you can't write it down in a statistic. But for instance, just coming back from the Chamber's speech now, that there's such a big room of people that you get to know, and they feel welcome or happy to walk up to you and talk about planning matters. And I think that's one of the big things that has happened. Really, the planning service feels to me like we've done a lot of work to re-engage with industry, which is not necessarily an improvement statistic, but I think it's an important part of the work that we do. And on the back of that, then more formal bits of interaction, which is around the partnership board, which I'm sure we might get to, which is there to help us do better work but improve our services, and then also regularly engaging with our service users in terms of giving information out. So there's a newsletter that goes out on a monthly basis, and we also have webinars and and events like that we put on. But then also in terms of culture change, we're doing a lot to speak to our planners and to sort of reinvigorate their love for planning and making sure that they are not just staring at computer screens the whole day, but going out and speaking to people and experiencing and asking about how people use our services and how we can do better. So I think that those are some of the things that I've been really excited about over the last year.
Sure, and taking those from that top line, I suppose the approach, the mindset that you've gone into this with, can we then go to the next stage with that and look at some stats? How is this going, and how is it translated into the applications that you approve on time, the proportion that are approved, and how that's moved on over the past year or so since you really focused on this?
Thank you. I think it's an important, but perhaps sometimes a slightly more boring bit around planning, which is telling you how good we are by giving you percentages and numbers. And our minister, like I say, have just spoken at the chamber, so hopefully some of the figures I give here will be recognised by people. They're kind of hot off the press. We are getting ready to issue our performance report for last year, but in short, I think that there's 3 or 4 key statistics that really, I think, whilst quite short when you mention them, is actually a lot of work that's gone into them, and one of the main ones is the work that we've done to reduce the backlog or the pending number of planning applications in our stack. So at the beginning of last year, we had about 360 or more applications that were waiting to be determined, and some of them had been with us for quite a period of time for various reasons. So we worked with our planners and our applicants and agents to try and reduce that down to as far as possible. And actually by the third quarter of last year, we'd reduced that to fewer than 250 applications, and that's a level where we've kept that now. So, the amount of planning applications that come into the system, we're trying to push the same or more out each week. And by the way, we're reporting on all our stats on a weekly basis to the minister. So so it's really open about what we do, and he takes a keen interest in that. The second one, which is almost our formal key performance indicator, and it has been for a while, and it's published on our website, is we want to try and determine 85% of all planning applications within a set period of time. For smaller applications, that's 8 weeks, and for larger ones, 13 weeks. Now, a year or so ago, we were struggling to hit around 70%. We've brought that up to over 80% in the last 9 to 10 months, and we maintaining it at a high level. And I think in the last few months there was a couple of weeks where we almost did 90%. So that's really good. It means it is difficult sometimes, especially for the larger applications, to determine it in 18 weeks because there's so much data to collect and assess. So we do sometimes ask for people to agree extensions of time with us, and I think that happens, but perhaps less often than in the past. And then the last thing that I think is really important, and I think in the past industry may have called it the refusal rate. We prefer to call it the approval rate. So that's actually as a percentage how many applications that get submitted to us actually gets a planning permission. And so when I joined government, it was sort of just above 70%, I believe. And we have done a lot of work, and I'll explain in a moment how to give applicants and ourselves to assist them to get the best possible outcome by delivering a positive outcome decision. So we're hovering at well over 80% at the moment. So actually, if you submit a planning application to us and you have used the pre-application service that we have available for you to, I believe that you are giving yourself a massively increased chance to get a positive outcome. And we've seen that, almost 10% rise in planning permissions being granted over the last year or so.
And that pre-service that's offered is something designed to iron out obvious problems, challenges, issues at an early stage, so that they can be remedied before the actual formal application comes in.
Yes, and the beauty about it is it's free, so we don't charge for it. So you can come and speak to us, in whatever stage your project is, whether it's really well developed and you've got loads of drawings and lots of information, or actually if you've just got a concept. And as long as you send us those details, we register it, and then we have a meeting with you if that's what you want, and we can have a chat with you about what the specific issues are that you want our advice on. And it's kind of a without prejudice, almost a safe space where our planners can sit down with a pen and a pencil with you and scribble on a piece of paper, but also give you advice about whether you're going to need any specialist input around economic impacts or impacts on the wildlife. So it really creates an opportunity for almost to preload that application process, so that by the time that you submit your documents to us, you've got a good chance of knowing exactly what you need to submit to us, and we can validate your application, you pay your fee, and then the assessment is as hopefully as painless as possible, because we've kind of pre-agreed what we need from you to make a decision. It doesn't mean that you're always going to get a permission, and sometimes in planning people don't agree. It's not unusual, but the other thing about the pre-app is that especially if you're working with really experienced agents, is to have a conversation around, okay, well on this point we disagree, and that's fine. Let's take that through the process, because in the end there's another part of the process where that can be sort of sorted out in the appeals process. So yeah, and I think that it sort of goes back to the first bit that I was saying about re-engaging with industries, is like having these pre-application talks with people that they're documented, so there's no secret information being passed to and fro, but it's a way of us talking to each other in a way to help each other understand a problem that we can hopefully solve together.
Great. I wanted to move on to your own personal working history. I understand you've moved to Jersey, having spent 20 years working in unitary authorities in London, and a further 4 for one of the councils in Essex, also in the UK. Having been here 16, 17 months so far, how does Jersey compare with the UK in terms of planning?
Yeah, thank you. As you can probably hear from my accent, I didn't start my career in the UK or in Jersey. So I qualified as a planner in South Africa, but after working there, worked in London for various authorities, including Ealing Council, Kensington and Chelsea, and Islington, before moving to an Essex District Council. So it's quite varied experience. It was really exciting for me to be able to come to Jersey and be given the opportunity to work for government over here. I found the island really beautiful, and it was very sunny, which I think helped it the first time I was here. Everybody's been really friendly and welcoming to me, so I really appreciate that. And obviously people are very courteous on the road, which is something that was really surprising to me. But it's still amazing that people let you over the road if you're standing and waiting to cross. So yes, in planning terms, I said to somebody the other day, it could sometimes be a bit disconcerting, because you walk in here and the law is similar to the UK. We've got an appeal system. It's a plan-led system, so lots of similarities, and then reality bites, and you start realizing, well, actually there's a different way of doing things over here, and that's absolutely fine. There are similarities in terms of green zone over here, so large swathes of the UK has got green belt, and the constraints in terms of development and the constraints it places on especially small villages and towns, that means there's a lot of development that needs to be concentrated in that. So that's very similar. And then the way in which the Bridging Island Plan works, it's very similar to a unitary development plan or a development plan that you would see in the UK, but clearly the way in which we interpret it and our own policies are slightly different, and we've got our own supplementary planning guidance. The other thing that I think is different but the same is in terms of appeal. So these policies, especially if they are new, needs to go through a process in order for people to agree that this policy is being interpreted correctly. And one of the ways to do that is to go to a planning appeal, where a planning inspector will then advise the minister on how the policy is interpreted. Now in the UK, you've got 320 odd local authorities, some with thousands of planning applications. There's a national policy framework, and over a very short period of time, because you've got loads and loads, thousands of appeals, you get an idea of actually this is the way that policy on Greenbelt, for instance, needs to be interpreted. Over here, we have got a smaller piece of land on the island. We've got fewer planning applications, and that means that your appeals system is quite slower for there to be agreement on how policy should be interpreted. So I think that was one of the main things that I noticed, is that we're sort of 2-3 years into a planned period, but there are still some policies that perhaps our planners and external parties don't always agree with. But we're happy to have the conversations with them during the pre-app stage to get to grips with that. But yes, I've found a really knowledgeable group of planners working in government, but also planning agents working in the industry. And then the other amazing thing is not just the close focus on what people do, because we've only got the one layer of government. You haven't got town councils and things like that. We've obviously got the parishes, but so government works quite different. And I think the access that citizens have to ministers and to government officials does come with a big responsibility to act and behave in a specific way. And I think there is a real expectation that we give a personable planning service to people, and we're committed to doing that. So, and I've had an amazing year and a bit here on the island, and I plan to stay a long time.
That's great. Just wanted to move on. One of getting into some of the details about people's experiences of the planning system. One of the frustrations we hear quite a bit from islanders, there are too many unnecessary rules, such as people say they've been stopped from replacing their windows or putting in double glazing. We've just had an announcement from the Minister about changes to these rules. Can you elaborate on what is going to change and the background behind that?
Yes, so I think we've got quite broad permitted development rights. So it's basically a planning permission given by the Minister or government for you to do all sorts of work. And most of the constraints, especially around windows, is to protect the heritage of the island. So the one thing that I know the Minister was keen to do, and it's been done today, and I think it's in the newspaper, and it's definitely on our website, is that the policy in terms of replacement of windows in heritage buildings have changed, and you will not necessarily allowing you to do it without permission, but definitely not if you've got windows that are not original. You will not usually be expected to go back to original type windows, as long as the replacements sort of bring some sort of benefit, and usually that'll be in sort of for climate change or other purposes. So I think that's one thing that industry has been talking about for a long time, and that's dropped in the last couple of days. So yes, that'll definitely mean that people will be able to do some more works to some of the heritage buildings, and subject to obviously some constraints that are still present to make sure that we protect our cultural heritage and buildings.
And I guess in doing that, it's as in a lot of cases, it's a question of striking a balance between the cultural heritage and allowing people to get on with it. Is that what you're saying to officers? We and I guess you're constantly looking just to make sure you're going down the middle of that balance rather than straying too much in one direction or the other.
Yes, no, I think that obviously Jersey has got a rich heritage, and that it's to be expected that there will be measures in place to protect it, and certainly the planning system in some instances is there to make sure that before somebody does something, you've assessed whether what they're doing is going to be appropriate for the building, both in terms of materials and not ruining listed buildings and places. Now, yes, that's a constraint on a building, but I do think that that we're really good, and including my colleagues in the heritage team, about giving good open advice to people around what we consider they can do to a building in terms of repairs and maintenance, but also improvements that's not going to ruin the cultural heritage. In a way, that's actually how the planning system works for a lot of things, because and the planning system creates that space where there can be consultation, not just with government experts in terms of heritage, but also with neighbours, interested parties, cultural societies, and I think that's one of the great things about the planning system that we've got here in Jersey, is there's a lot been done to make sure that it's transparent and open. And I think, for heritage buildings, it's no different than to other buildings. Is once you're into that system and there's a consultation process, there can be a proper assessment of what you're proposing and what the impact would be on heritage buildings, but also what the policies are that the government has voted for, and that we as planners will apply mostly when we look at planning applications. So, there's always a balance in planning, and so it's not unusual for most applications for there to be a very fine balancing act between competing policies in terms of heritage, but then also wildlife protection perhaps, but also economic benefit that a development may bring.
Great, and we've also heard from the Minister about his intention to give the economy more weight in planning decisions. I guess that's the top level aim. But in terms of you guys at the coalface, how do you actually go about delivering that sort of aim when it's come down from the boss?
Yes, so we have been working with our colleagues in the Future Economy team for the last year or so, and possibly a bit more, to lift the not the presence, but the profile of economic benefit and the future economy during the course of planning applications. So they regularly give us formal feedback on planning applications where there appears to be a particular economic benefit to a proposal, and that's been really useful. We've got monthly liaison meetings with them. Obviously the Minister, like he said today, is in regular contact with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, so I like to think that the ties that we have with that team is really, really close. The planning law actually says that unless something is sort of not in line with the island plan, generally planning permission should be granted, but it doesn't actually say which bits of legislation or policy planners should not take into account. So there is an opportunity for somebody, if they make a specific case to us and it's backed up by scientific evidence that one of their proposals is going to have a specific economic benefit, and we are able to weigh up that in a scientific way against other benefits or harms, then that makes it really, really more easy for us to take that into consideration. What is difficult for us is if somebody comes to us and says, I want to do this, and there's no economic benefit to us apparent, because we can't make that up, and you shouldn't make it up, because planning is an art and a science, and the economy bit is part of the sciencey bit, so you need figures and so forth. So and that's why the assistance or the comments that our colleagues in the Future Economy team provide to us during the formal planning application process has been really, really helpful for us to assist that. There's more to be done, and some of it is around engagement with industry, and again, as part of the pre-application process, to make sure that we are clear about what we might need in order for us to make that balancing decision during the course of the application. But the tools are there. The Minister has just said in his speech that that's what he expects to happen. I'd like to think that we're already quite good at doing that, but like everything else in planning, we always think that we can do better. But that is the message we're going to be giving to industry, is come speak to us and let's try and talk around what you can do to give yourself the best chance to give us the information we need to scientifically assess your application in terms of economic benefit.
And you talked earlier about, or we touched on homeowners and some of their frustration about windows was the example we used. There have also been some complaints that have historically from businesses about the planning process being slow. It's too expensive and risky to build the houses or other buildings that we need. Other big developments. Have you heard that, and what are you doing to address it?
Yes, we especially shortly after I came to the island, there was a lot of I think bad press around planning and how slow it is and unreasonable and expensive. So I think and so there was a narrative, and some of it was backed up by obviously evidence. So I've spoken about what our performance figures were before and how they've improved. But actually, if you think about it, the way in which we do planning in Jersey, this is a comment we quite often get, is that the planning application fees are quite high. But actually, we have other things that we provide for free, like the pre-application advice service that potentially could be hugely resource expensive, because it's sometimes you could have two planners sitting there with you and talking to you about your project, and that we give for free. And if it's for free, why wouldn't you use it to make your planning application process? So it's not going to reduce your fee, but it's going to give you a much better chance to get a positive outcome. The other thing that, for instance, in the UK, that councils would typically charge for is planning processing agreements, which we also provide as a free service. So that allows you to come and speak to us about what your program is for delivery. So, and for instance, one of the first planning processing agreements that we signed was with a developer for one of the allocated sites, which was really exciting to us, because we actually delivered a decision on that in a very, very short time. And I think there was once where we had to renegotiate a couple of weeks with the applicant, but I wouldn't say it was record-breaking time, but that was one of the biggest housing sites developed in the shortest period of time, and that was largely because of pre-application discussions, but also this planning processing agreement that we entered into. So we have got ways to help you, not just delivering quick decisions, but also timely decisions. And clearly, if it's a more complicated project, then it's helpful for both parties to understand what the timelines is. For instance, if you've got finance, or you need to be on a site on a specific day for various reasons, the weather or surveys that you need to do, then and those are all things that we can feed into a decision-making project plan to make sure that we do our best to deliver an outcome for you on time. So we've definitely sped up the decision-making process. There's more to be done. There are bits of the island where it's more difficult to develop than others because of all sorts of constraints, heritage, green zone, the coastal zones, and sometimes those applications do take longer for various reasons. But there's no benefit to us or government to delay planning applications, and clearly that's not something that we would want to do, whether it's a small development or whether it's a family waiting on a rear extension because they've got a baby coming, or whether it's somebody building a big building. All of those are important to somebody, and we committed to making quality, quick decisions.
I'd just like to look more at your role as a civil servant in this. You've had a change of minister a few months after you took up the role, and coming in with new priorities, that changes that they want to make. What's your role in taking that on board and delivering it?
So over the last year or so, or until January this year, we didn't have two permanent managers in development and land in the planning applications team and the compliance and appeals team. So those two managers have started in January, and that's going to make my life hopefully a lot easier. But so over the last year, my main focus was on getting to know people and going around the island and speaking to all our applicants and service users, but also talking to our planners around processes and procedures and looking at things that we were doing that maybe wasn't adding any benefit to to the applicant, or could have been taking up a lot of time, and it not necessary to do all the time or the same all the time. So it's looking at process and procedure and how we can speed that up. But it's also coming up with not just ideas for myself, but asking others what their ideas are and interpreting those and seeing how they can feed into the service improvement piece that was already ongoing when I started. Because like I said before, the McKinnon report dropped I think somewhere in April or May 2023. So by then, I think the then minister had already decided that we're going to embark on a specific number of projects. And so the other part of my job, the first year, was then making sure that we deliver on those commitments, which were around publishing a service charter and looking at the industry partnership board and constituting that, getting the newsletter up and running, and having regular contact sessions with our service users, and those things take up quite a bit of time. And it's not just me doing that. We've got support in the regulation directorate helping us with that. We're really excited about that. So just sort of a figure perhaps, our newsletter, I think we've got over 160 subscribers to that at the moment. So that's something that's really positive. And I think our last planning industry webinar was attended by like 60 or 70 people. So, and that's the bit that's really excited to us, is where we're on a regular basis. We're getting more and more people willing to come and engage with us and give us their time to make the service better. So, lots of work still to do, but yeah, we've come a long way in the last year, I feel, and certainly that if you forgive me for saying so, that the conversations that I'm having with agents and planners and architects feels quite positive to me.
And I think leading on to that, this is a perception in Jersey, possibly a historic one, that planning always says no, it's hard to get approval. Do you think that is true now? Has it changed? I think from the statistics you mentioned earlier, there definitely is numerical evidence of that.
No, the evidence in the numbers, definitely, I'd say between an 8 and a 10% increase in the number of planning permissions we give. Whether that means that the process is easier for people, that's a different conversation. But the two are linked. We don't want to make it unnecessarily difficult for somebody to get planning permission. But yeah, it's looking at that balance, and I think the numbers show that we are giving more permissions. It's not that we dropped standards or changed the way in which we assess permissions, other than obviously learning from mistakes or appeal decisions that don't go our way. But the main thing that we've been doing is speaking to applicants more beforehand and making sure that we give them the best opportunity to give us an application that can get a positive outcome. I mean, that 8 to 10% doesn't sound like much, but if you look at the figures, it's a large number. And the other thing that I can say to you is for planning committee, for instance, most, like 2/3 of the planning applications that go to planning committee go there with a favourable recommendation from officers. It's really not in anybody's interest, and especially not ours, to be refusing planning applications at the drop of a hat. It's much more work to refuse a planning application than it is to give permission. That the assessments tend to be more complicated, and yes, so we want to give permissions. Clearly, there are cases in which we won't be, and then there's the appeal process to hopefully be the check and balance to that. We want to get it up a bit higher, but certainly elsewhere where I've worked, if you've got an approval rating of around 85%, that's not bad.
You mentioned the appeals process there. We've also heard from the minister that he's keen to review third-party appeals. is that something you've encountered elsewhere? What are the specific appeals, the specific issues, I should say, around third-party appeals?
I haven't come across third-party appeals before. They are present in other jurisdictions. At the moment they're available to somebody who lives within 50 meters of a site where permission has been granted and where they were an objector. We actually don't get as many of them as one might think we get, and that's not surprising, but that's what the data shows. It's quite a low number, and some of those appeals, when they go to an inspector, that third party that appealed actually wins the appeal, which I think it is a really democratic and open and transparent way to run your planning system. You do get it a lot where one party, the person who's made the application, has got a right of appeal, but somebody else doesn't, and then people say, well, why is that? Well, here in Jersey, you can appeal if you're an interested party and you're a neighbour and you're not happy with the outcome of a planning application. And I think that's quite proper that we have it. I mean, it's I'm not saying I've got a preference one way or another, but we have it and it seems to work. And I think it's a good idea in terms of democratic principles. But I guess if we go and have a consultation and hear what the islanders say around third party appeals, it would be really interesting to see what comes out of that, because clearly there is a tension, and you're always going to have that in planning or in development, where there's some people who might be in favour of something and others who might be less in favour. And I think we've got a good way of giving a proper check and balance for that decision making process.
Great, and we've wanted to perhaps move on in closing to the island plan. Is that the sort of document that is being used elsewhere? We did touch on this earlier, but when looking at changes to the island plan, how might we take those on and perhaps learn some of the lessons that you've encountered elsewhere?
Yes, so the plan-led system is well acknowledged. The UK have been trying to change the planning system there since the 1997 or thereabouts, and over there they've still got a plan-led system, and it's just because of the way in which it's set up. It makes sense, especially if that's what you've been doing for a period of time. Now, the plan that we have here is, when I speak to people, and hopefully those of you who listen in will recognise, it's a Ferrari of a plan, or a Rolls Royce. It is a very, very detailed, very comprehensive plan that, in terms of the detail and the aspirations, in terms of heritage and climate and all of those things is right up there with, it's top notch. How do we go about making the plan more flexible if it's written in law, how it should be made and how it should be interpreted? Well, I think that's from the Minister's speech, if I understand it correctly, is I think he's looking at ways of making it more agile in terms of if things change quickly, because things had to change quickly with COVID, for instance. So the Bridging Island Plan is partially a result of that. But what happens when economic circumstances change? Is the plan flexible enough to allow for us to use that? The Minister said today, certainly one of the things that he's going to be asked to be debated is around whether you have to wait to review the whole island plan, or whether there's an appetite for reviewing policies in the plan, not one by one, but if something happens, choose one, talk around it, and see whether we can change that policy and not wait for the whole plan. And I think that seems to me to be something that could assist in making things more not more flexible, but certainly more agile in terms of decision making. In regulation or in planning, we are duty-bound to make decisions in accordance with the law and what it says in the law. So, we take material planning considerations and other things, but also the policies in the plan into consideration. So if the policies don't change for a long period of time, or the policies haven't changed and circumstances have, you then sometimes have that tension about, my planners are giving me this advice, but actually things are like this. And somewhere in the middle there's a space where we've got a plan that really works, where people understand the policies, and where those policies are agile in a way that allows us to react to things that can change dramatically in very short periods of time, including interest rates, labour shortages, and things like that, which sometimes these plans, especially if they span longer periods of time, sometimes find difficult to address.
Brilliant. Well, we'll be interested to hear how these changes go as they move on, and perhaps talk to you again about it. It's been interesting to hear about the latest news. Plenty going on, Andrew. Sounds like It's going to keep you busy over the foreseeable future, but I guess that's a good thing.
Yes, no, thank you. And I really always look forward to reading stories in the press about us, especially if it's good news stories. But like I said, we're really happy to engage with service users, but people on the island who've got problems or have had an unhappy experience with planning. Come and talk to us. We won't know what we're doing wrong unless you tell us. So thank you for the opportunity. I hope people have enjoyed listening to me.
That's great. Andrew Marx, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Andrew Marx. I hope you'll agree it's been very interesting to hear about the changes in planning over the past couple of years, and we'll hope to check back in for future interviews to see how things are going. That's it from this episode of the Bailiwick Podcast, but don't forget to stay up to date with all the latest news via our website bailiwickexpress.com. Thanks for listening.